Welcome to Fear and Greed Summer Investing Series, brought to you by Vanta, specialists in compliance-led growth. I'm Sean Aylmer. One of the biggest investments many of us will ever make is our home. 2024 was an unusual year for property prices, moving beyond a 2-speed market to a 3 or maybe 4-speed market, led by the mid-sized capital cities. So, what does 2025 hold? Alice Stolz is the National Property Editor at Domain. Alice, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here.
So, right to the point. What's your prediction for prices next year? Can we still see those mid-tier capitals doing so well? What's going to happen to Melbourne? What's going to happen to Sydney?
Look, I think we are going to continue to see price rises, but the pace or that turbocharged energy that we've definitely seen throughout this year is going to ease off somewhat. We are still, though, expecting some regional markets to potentially hit the $1 million club, which I don't think anyone ever saw that coming. A few years ago, that would have been sort of stop press sort of moment. And we expect to still see areas like Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth as sort of the quiet achievers. They're the ones that are really leading the charge here. Sydney will keep ticking along, but Melbourne, it's becoming an uncomfortable topic. And I say that as a Melburnian, Sean, but times are tough in our fair city here.
What is it about Melbourne that's making it so difficult, or has made it so difficult the last 12 months and, based on what you've just said, will make it tough for the next 12 months?
Yeah, well, look, house prices in Melbourne have gone backwards down 1.5% annually over the past year. And that's pretty extraordinary for a city like Melbourne that was once sort of tipped to become, nipping at Sydney's heels. I think we're sort of far away from that now, knowing how much growth Brisbane has also seen. What's driving it? We are seeing a lot of investors leave that market due to it being the most heavily taxed state. It's a bit of a sore point at dinner parties or barbecues these days. You mentioned that, and people are kind of just fiercely devastated by the fact that the government has layered and layered on taxes when it comes particularly to investors. And when you think about investors, people sort of think, oh yeah, lots of people with lots of thousands of properties and big portfolios. But often that's the mum and dad type investors, but where they're seeing this increase in land tax and that, it's just getting harder for them to manage holding on to their secondary property that they might have once, lived off for their super or something. It's becoming much more problematic, and they're the ones that we're seeing selling, and the prices just aren't holding up.
Now, based on Domain data, the clearance rates certainly fell towards the end of this year, and even Sydney seems to have hit a bit of a soft spot in the last month or so. What's the prognosis? I mean, do you think prices can keep growing in that city?
I do think in Sydney they will keep growing. Having said that, the clearance rates, I acknowledge that they have been tapering towards sort of the later part of this summer season we're in at the moment. However, we have seen record levels of stock though, Sean. So I kind of feel relatively comfortable with that, knowing the weight of those listings. We're seeing records up in what they haven't been in years and years at the moment, because we have seen so much stock held back from market as interest rates started to rise, and many people just have thought, life goes on, I've got to keep going along with this. And they're also wanting to cash in on that price growth that they've experienced, particularly in markets such as Sydney. So in terms of clearance rates, they are soft, but I think that's normal given the level of activity that we're seeing. I guess all this also to say, though, this is kind of actually really good news for buyers, because finally they've actually got a lot of choice. And we know that for buyers, that is also good news because, for the past year or two, the supply hasn't been there, and there basically have been not much choice available to them.
We always talk about interest rates as being kind of all important in house prices, though, as you've just been talking about, stock matters equally. How important is interest rates? And let's assume that we will get a couple of interest rate cuts next year at some point. How important is that to the market?
I think it really impacts confidence, and I think it's an interesting thing. It's a bit sort of like an emotional lever, I suppose. So what's happened is we're seeing a big dump of stock this spring when people thought interest rates were going to start declining, and clearly that didn't come to fruition. So what we expect next year, we'll probably have a year of two halves, let's call it. Probably the first half of the year will be a distraction with elections, and probably unlikely at this stage to have an interest rate cut. And I think when that cut does hopefully come at least in the second half of next year, we will definitely see more supply come onto the market. Having said that, really what impacts ultimately prices, though, is population. So interest rates will sort of be the heart. Let's think of it like that. That's the heart that makes people think, oh, I'll hold off, I won't sell now. But population growth is what's really going to underpin prices. And that's why in cities such as Melbourne, I believe it will be okay here eventually, knowing the population growth of what's coming to Victoria. But I do think for the sort of short term, that is what's holding people back from making those big transactions.
So the wrap of this, Melbourne, not so sure about the next 12 months. Sydney should keep expanding, but not probably at the pace of the Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and some of the regions will do pretty well.
Correct. And you know what, though? I think also Sydney just becomes more and more unaffordable and people start looking further afield because they just simply cannot afford to live in that magical but very, very expensive city.
Alice, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Sean.
That was Alice Stolz, National Property Editor at Domain. Remember to get your own independent advice before making investment decisions. This is Fear and Greed's Summer Investing Series, brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for frameworks like ISO 27001, SOC 2, CPS 234 and Essential 8, saving time and money while building trust. Join over 8,000 companies like Atlassian, Dovetail and FireAnt, managing real-time risk. Get $1,000 off at vanta.com/fearandgreed. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.